Alright, so I've got a couple of options for lubricating this. One, as I said, was to get a pencil, a soft graphite pencil, and run it all the way around the inside edge there. And that's so that the blade actuating ring is running basically on graphite. So you can drop it in like that. That works very well. The alternative is to assemble it and then blow some graphite powder in there and work the graphite powder backwards and forwards. Now our plate here goes on this way up, and its position, you should be able to figure out its position. And I think probably there would do nicely. That sits there nicely. It fits in around the speed train. This projection here lines up with this boss, and we have 3 screws that hold this in place. One of them was longer than its mates, and if I could remember correctly, it was here next to the delay action or self timer. Let's see if it'll fit in there. Doesn't want to start. Alright, let's put the 2 short ones in. Have another go with this one. That was it. Right, so with the 3 screws now in position, I can go around and tighten them up. And check that the blade actuating ring moves freely. That appears good to me. On the top, we've got to put our little lever back in place here. Of course, I haven't cleaned that yet, so I better do that. And I've got to put its return spring back in place too. Here I'm just cleaning the underside of that screw, because you can probably see where the screw runs against that lever. Alright, let's pop this back into place. Now I'm going to put some lubricant on this. I've got some molybdenum paste here. You could use graphite grease if you had it, or you could use any other grease if you had it, or you could do it dry. But I'm just putting a wipe through the pivot hole in the centre, and in the slot is where it runs on the lever, and you can see the stud of the blade actuating ring sticking up there. I'll get that seated on its post. And run its screw in. And check that that moves freely. Yeah, that feels good. So its return spring I need to get back in position. Well, here's its return spring. I need to get that over the post and the tail of the spring down in that hole in the plate. That was it. Let's get that spring hooked in position on the arm. So now this is spring loaded. So that's our blade actuating ring, cleaned, sprung loaded and ready to go. Of course I've got to deal with the shutter blades next. So with the shutter blades, well, normally with shutter blades all you're needing to do, if they're in good order, is swab them with a bit of naphtha and all will be well. You're just wanting to remove any oil or contaminants from the blades. But these blades are a little bit marked. I'd like to improve the look of those, so I'm going to polish them with some Brasso metal polish. Alright, just going to polish this blade with some metal polish. Got it here on a firm foam plastic block. And one of the difficulties with blades like this is that they have reinforcements at the top here on both sides. That means that metal polish or anything else will tend to run in between those layers and potentially make its presence felt later. That should do nicely. So now I've got to clean off that polish. So I'll clean off the bulk of it like this. Be careful not to catch the blade with your cotton bud and bend it up. You can recover from errors like that, but it's not good. You'll always end up with some sort of mark across the blade where it was bent. Okay, so having that looking quite good now. Of course I'm concerned about any polish that might have snuck down between the sheets of the blade, so I'm just going to hose this down here with some isopropyl alcohol, and you could use just about anything useful in the way of a solvent to do that. Brake cleaner might be a good thing. Wipe that down, clean cotton bud. Take the excess off. If everything goes well, I'll have a clean shutter blade, devoid of all the marks that were on it before. Okay, yeah, that's looking pretty good. So that blade's ready for reassembly. I've already done its mates, so there's no point you watching me do that 5 times. I haven't lubricated the speed trains in here, but I'll show you how I would go about lubricating the blade actuating ring if I didn't do it with the pencil lead. I'd just simply pop some graphite powder down there. And then take the tip of the tweezers, just work that backwards and forwards. Knock the excess off and blow it out. That would be the way to do it. But I'll need to do the speed trains as well, so I'm going to do that with graphite powder while I'm here. So I'll just apply a bit of graphite powder. That's a lot more than I expected to use. Hold back the pellets with my finger at this end and work the action in and out, distributing that powder across the wheels and down their spindles. The delay action or the self-timer can be treated in a similar way. This is a bit harder to deal with, just because there's no easy way to get onto it. I'm just gently nudging those wheels around there. You certainly want to be gentle doing that. You don't want to distort the teeth, things won't move smoothly. But that should do. So what I'll do now is just go and blow the excess out, and then we can put the shutter blades on this and close the case. Alright, I need to get the blade actuating ring into the blade's open position. So I'll do that by unhooking that return spring, moving this arm outwards. Now that will be sitting in the blade's open position. I can start stacking the shutter blades in place. And getting these in the right order is tricky. We've got 2 with the tip of the blade has got a bend on it. See if we can get the right one in the right place. Blade number 1 goes here, and the tip of the blade should be tipping downwards towards the centre there. Blade 2 is just a flat blade. Blade 3 the same. Blade 4 the same as that. These are all just stacked on top of each other, and you can see I'm positioning the blades in an anti-clockwise direction. Blade 5. Now the tip of blade 5 should be pointing towards you. So all our blades are in position. I'm just checking that the tip of this blade is in fact pointing up, and blade number 1 was the one that was pointing down. That all looks good. If we take our case, the case only goes on in one direction. There are 4 fixing screws. They're not evenly spaced. We want 2 close together at the bottom, which will be this one and this one. Here and here, I would say. And the further apart ones are here and here, matching the case. So I lower that into position without disturbing anything. Check that these screw holes are lined up, and we had 4 identical screws to go in there. Just run those up lightly. There's always a danger when you're putting a case on over the top of shutter blades that one or more of the shutter blades has jumped off its pivots while you were doing it. And if you just tighten up the screws and a blade is displaced, it will be damaged. So it's important that you check that everything's fine before you tighten the screws. Okay, so that opens and closes smoothly. I can put its spring back in place. And you can see those shutter blades look much happier now than they did before I started. Those 4 screws can now be tightened up. I think I just made a tactical error there. I think I should have probably assembled that flash sink stuff before I put that together. Yes, so I can get at that spring, of course. I might be able to work around that. I'll see if I can cheat, otherwise I'll pull that back out. Alright, let's get this in place. I'm going to put a fine wipe of molybdenum paste in the centre of that, where it sits on its pivot. I think I need to drop that wheel over first. I've got to get this engaged at the right spot. So I need to consult my picture. I'm pretty sure that that is not where it's supposed to be. Okay, well I've printed out my picture and I've got that lever set in the right position so that that little tab there lines up exactly as it does in the picture, which shows you the importance of taking pictures first. Now I can put those blades back on. So I've got the shutter blades back in position. We have this sitting in the correct position now. Take great note of that so you can get yours in the same place. That obviously I'd set in there without, that's before I put the shutter blades back in place and before I fitted the case. I've had 2 goes at this, doing it in different ways. There is no simple way to do it. It's easiest to assemble all this flash sink componentry with the case apart, but it complicates things when you try to get the shutter blades and the case back over it. So realistically there's no simple way of doing it, it's just going to be awkward one way or another. So the first thing I'm going to do here is just put the flash contact in place. And it's held in place with a single black screw. And that is the complication with fitting the shutter blades back after you've pre-assembled this stuff. because that flash contact is a tight fit in the case, and you'll be fitting the case on upside down like that, trying to get this guided into place without rattling the shutter blades off their pivots. It can certainly be done, but it's not easy, it's not straightforward, and you probably won't enjoy it. So the standoffs, we've got a little brass standoff here which fits in there. It's wedge shaped. You can see the flat top. The underside is relieved away to provide clearance for the spring, presumably. So it only fits in one direction in that corner there. 500th of a second speed spring goes here on that post. I'll just give that a wipe of molybdenum paste through the centre there. Fit it over its post. Now that's awkward item number 2, because we have to get the cover fitted over the top of that. It has to be wriggled under the spring, and various other items which are also awkward. So we'll just work at it. So the moving flash contact, that goes in here, and a little standoff sits on top of it, that little bush. Now, check the position of that flash contact. You can see it drops into the gap here. Then we have to get the cover plate in place. Here's our cover plate, and the cover plate has this little arm attached at the bottom. The gap in here, this little tab has to go on this side of that spring. So you've got to get all this wriggled into place all at the same time. It is possible, it's just very awkward. So I'm trying to wriggle that under this spring, lift it up, get it over the pin at this point. That's fallen into place. But what about this? Our flash contact's on the wrong side of this arm. So we've got to lift the flash contact up, disturbing it and the position of the spacer, the bush, and make sure this spring's still sitting in place, and checking that I've got things where I need them. That's now not sitting in the right place. That should be over that side of the post. And so that little complication, we now have the flash contact sitting correctly in between this arm and here. We have the flash contact sitting between this post on the fixed contact and the body. We have our 500th of a second speed spring sitting in place. This little arm here needs to be sitting outwards. If it's pushed inwards, it's probably on the wrong side of a tab in here. So there's where you see this little rivet on the underside, you can just see a flat plate there. If this is in the wrong position, I'll see if I can get it in the wrong position for fun. Yeah, but if it's in that position, it's in the wrong side of that plate and it will not work. So that needs to be free. I'll start the screw at this end that passes through that little brass triangular wedge shaped bush, but just start the screw, because there's another complication. That's just loose. At this end we've got to get our green lever in, its Wrigley spring and its fixing screw. So let's deal with the other complication I mentioned. This little lever here is sprung loaded, and at the moment it's tucked under this plate. It needs to be up against the edge of the plate, not tucked under it. So I'm just holding down this plate with my screwdriver, and I'll pull that lever out, and it just clicked into place. There. This lever is now sitting against the edge of the plate there. I'll run that screw up tight. That's in position. Now this is not sitting level anymore, which means that something else is out of position. My flash contact. Yes, the whole thing had pulled over. It wasn't sitting over its pivot on this at this point, and this arm has amused itself by dropping onto the wrong side of that piece. Okay, so my plate is sitting flat now. It's not held up on anything. Make sure that screws tight, and we'll move into putting the other pieces in place. Now, getting these pieces in place is easier if you've got the whole mechanism plate out of the case, but getting the case back over that mechanism with the blades in place without disturbing them is tricky. Once I get the screw in here and get this complete, I won't be fitting the other levers at this point. I'll remove the mechanism from the case again and show you how you can actually get it back into place in the case with only an awful lot of trouble. Okay, let's get this Wrigley spring in place. Now this Wrigley spring has got a tiny little bent piece right at the end, and that drops into that hole. So the spring has to pass under our 500th of a second speed spring, and we want the end of the spring tucked down that hole. The spring also sits against this post, so at the moment it's sitting there. Let's get this swung out of the way so you can see. At the moment you can see it's sitting here, and our green lever needs to pass under that, and then we can clip the spring into place. Now this is just awkward. There's no other way to describe it. The shutter is not an easy shutter to assemble. And this particular task is much the same whether you're assembling this speed train in the shutter or out of the shutter. I mean with the blades in place. See if I can get this green arm under here. Get that under that spring. Okay, get that green arm in position and see if I can get the screw started down the centre of that bush. And I'll just get this screw started, run it down a little bit. Don't run it down far because the spring has to be picked up and clipped to this side of that tiny little rivet there. And of course now it's sprung loaded and the screw will not want to drop down smoothly. So we need the lever to pivot smoothly on that screw not be trapped underneath it. It pivots around the shoulder of the screw. That's looking good. So that's in position. And you can see how that shifts this lever, which changes the way the flash contact moves. And that flash contact has taken the opportunity to drop onto the wrong side of that post. So I've got to loosen this screw off again and get that flash contact back where it should be, which is over there. Did I mention that this was awkward? Okay, that looks acceptable. Let's check my screws at both ends. Right, so at this stage I've got most of that gear assembled. Now at this stage is also as far as you can assemble things if you want to put this gear in place on the mechanism plate before you fit the shutter blades. And it is a choice. One method, as I say, they're both awkward. One is probably, they've just got different awkwardness about them. I'm going to unhook this spring, swing this into the blade's open position, remove the 4 screws from the back of the case, and this is just to demonstrate to you that it is possible to get the case in position with that flash stuff assembled to that stage if you so desire, because it's marginally less awkward to shift things about to get things in place. Right, so I'm going to wriggle this off because the flash contact here is sticking in the case. Okay, so there you can see the shutter blades are all positioned. I'm just checking that they're positioned correctly and I haven't disturbed anything. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're all correct. Here's our case. The cutout in the case, the square cutout here, has to drop over this flash post here. The little green lever will have moved beyond its normal range. So I'm going to have to manipulate this little green lever so that it drops into this gap smoothly, because otherwise it will just get trapped by the edge. And do this all at the same time while not disturbing the shutter blades from where they're sitting comfortably over their little pins there. So this is awkward, but it's possible, and I've done it. Okay, so that's feeding over the flash contact. I'm just going to move that green lever across slightly so the case will fall over it. That just fell down into position, and now I should be able to fit the 4 screws, and with a little bit of luck the shutter blades will not have fallen out of position. So I'm just putting 1 screw in there lightly. I'll put 1 in opposite there, again lightly, because the danger that the shutter blades have moved out of position is moderate. And flip it over, check that the blade's closed, refit the spring. That's all good. I can go back now, put my other 2 screws in position, and then tighten those 4 screws up. So I haven't found, there must be a service manual for this shutter. The service manuals were never very good. They were exceptionally brief in their contents, and just assumed you knew an awful lot more than you probably did. Okay, so they're all tightened up. That's all looking good. Puff away that little speck of dust. Our shutter's looking quite good at that stage. And I can assemble the other levers to it. It'd be nice to say that that's all the awkward work over, but that wouldn't really be true. Okay, well at this stage, this is the right time to put the main lever in position. The other two levers that go on here, one here, and there's a 2 lever set that go here. If you put them on first, it obscures things, it makes it hard to see what you're doing. So I've just wiped around the inside lip of the main lever, the tabs on the side, on the head of the bird paw. I'm going to give that spring a wipe too. This rubs up against the case in here, and I want that to move smoothly. The spring is not as wonderful as it might be. Getting this thing in place is awkward. This little tab here has to be folded back that way so that it catches on the sprocket here. So let's see if I can get this in position. So I'll slide this spring underneath this tab. Now I warn you, it doesn't want to slide. To get this spring over the top here, of course it doesn't want to go. Okay, so what are we sitting on? What are our obstructions? Well, our obstruction here is this tab on the delete the retard gear train. That tab is your first obstruction. You have to hold that tab outwards and then you can swing this back out of the way. That'll allow you to drop things down. And this lever needs to pop down, pulled back that way, so it'll fit into its space. And that stage, things are looking reasonably good. What have I not got? You need to watch the 500th of a second spring here. It needs to be swung around this way at this stage. If it's on the other side of the lever, not only won't it work, it'll block the action from happening. Now I'm just forcing this lever back. Its return spring is not hooked to anything yet. In fact, it's just being an obstruction. I just pulled that back out of the way. That is sitting in the rest position, in the uncocked position, and the spring, I can just see the tip of this spring. I can just see down in here, and I've got to hook that with my tweezers and get it over this post. It's fair to say it's awkward. And it's even more awkward now than it was. Let's get that little lever out. I didn't realise I had that in place. Because now I have lubricated things with a little bit of molybdenum paste, so it's even more awkward to get my tweezers to pick that spring up. Life would be much easier if this top plate was not here, but if that top plate was not there, we'd have all the fight of trying to get these contacts in place. Now, I'm not sure you'd be able to achieve it. See if I can get that spring. Now, if you had a suitable spring hook, this might work well. I used to have a wonderful one which was a very, very fine crochet hook. Very, very fine, but it was quite strong. But it went west many years ago, and I've never found another suitable replacement. Well, I assure you this is possible because I've done it about 3 or 4 times, probably more than that. Well, I've been working on this shutter, trying to determine the most straightforward way to get the shutter striates in place. Okay, so our setting ring is in place, our main lever. Just checking that everything's tucked down in position. It's all looking good. Let's put everything back on the top. It needs to be here. This is our shutter release lever. I'll give that a touch of molybdenum paste through the hole in the centre where it pivots on this post. The return spring on that lever has to hook onto this thing here. I know it's a really odd shaped looking spring, but it's supposed to be a really odd shape. The 500-second speed spring is good there. While I'm here with my molybdenum paste, I will put a touch on that spring for our flash sync switch. Okay, more levers. This one fits over here. I'm just going to give that a wipe of molybdenum paste through the centre where it pivots and hook its spring around somewhere where it's easy to get at. That's better. I can see the screw hole. So the spring is not tensioned at this stage. Need to get my fixing screw in place and then get the spring into position. The spring here I've got to be careful to make sure it doesn't get trapped underneath the screw head. That's better. Otherwise things won't move right. There's our lever, moves freely. The spring, the tail of the spring has to be lifted up and put around this side of that pin. Like that. So this lever is now sprung loaded. And this lever is sprung loaded, and the other end of the spring on here is fixed to this little lever, which actually catches the main ring and holds the shutter in the cocked position. Okay, so we're down to the last couple of levers here. We've got this wonderful looking thing here with a complicated spring. That sits on in that orientation. And that should be tensioned back against the edge like that. So that's under tension, and the nose of this little lever will be running against the cocking ring, the main ring. Main lever. So it's sitting there. Let's get this little lever in next. Now I usually just give these a touch of molybdenum paste through the centre where they pivot. You could lubricate them just as well running the tip of a lead pencil through there. So I've got that sitting on the post, and it has a single retaining screw. It holds both those levers in place, and of course my magnetic screwdriver is annoying me. Whoops. Let's try it two-handed. slipped away. Again, make sure the spring's not trapped underneath anything. We've now got to get the spring into position. Now this spring, which you can possibly see just here, has to tuck in to a little groove in the tip of this lever. Now, getting my tweezers, I'll swing that into position. Okay, so everything's looking good there. The tip of this lever, where it rubs on the main lever, I just gave that a wipe of molybdenum paste. That's looking pretty good. I think I can close the shutter on that. So, here's the shutter speed settings cam plate. Now I want to put a wipe of molybdenum paste through the centre. That's so it'll turn smoothly on the body here. Now all the lumps and bumps of the cams here, put a wipe on those. And you can see on the underside that those cam surfaces run right through there. That'll do. I don't need any more than that. So at the moment the shutter's in the uncocked position. I'll fit this in place. Fits down over the top. This lever needs to be unhooked because otherwise it gets trapped underneath. That's your B lever, I think. I'm just checking the motion of this, make sure it moves smoothly. Let's try cocking the shutter. So watch this tiny lever here, and when that clicks in, that means that's when the shutter's cocked. If you go beyond that, you'll set the self timer. That just dropped into place and the shutter fires. Now if we were to continue the cocking action all the way, we'll have set the self timer and you'll hear the self timer running down. And the shutter fires. Now that's on the X setting. I'm also going to check it on the M setting to make sure that it works. It should do because I've assembled that sync mechanism correctly, but if you don't check it at this stage you won't know, and then it will cause you problems carrying on. Okay, so that's all looking good. The cover plate. I'm going to give that a very light wipe on that surface around towards the centre. It's just where this plate's going to rub on it. This only goes on one way. It bayonets into place. Let's get that rotated a bit further around. There. If I rotate that into place to line up that little lock tab with its notch, and I should be able to rotate that to lock the plate in place. So the base shutter there now is all assembled. And I can just close up the pretty stuff that goes on it basically and put it back in the camera. So at the front of the shutter we have this plate. I better get this the right way round or we'll be in trouble. It's got two little tabs here, so that it actually only goes on here one way. That just engages those two little notches. Now underneath that, or on top of that if you like, we've got two tiny thin plastic shims that go here. Now the purpose of those shims is to adjust the lens to film distance on this camera. Now, it is an interchangeable lens camera. There were other lenses available, so it was not enough to simply adjust the lens to suit the body. The body needed to be adjusted to a fixed standard so that any of the accessory lenses would work correctly. If you wanted to go about it back to front, you would adjust each of the accessory lenses to match your camera body. Much easier if you're just adjusting the camera body to the standard. So I've got the little tool I had for tightening this thing up. Just do that up snug. It doesn't need to go, you don't need to go mad, it's not doing an awful lot of hard work. So that's our shutter back together there. Now the cover that went on the back of that can go in place. And we should be able to find out where that fits. I think that would probably fit there. Here's the screw hole. There. There's a screw hole. So I will get these 3 case screws back in place, and then we can fit the shutter back onto the camera body. So fitting the shutter back to the camera body, what have we got to achieve? Well, we've got to get our cocking action in the right position relative to the shutter, and the release in position too. Let's see if we can do it. It's the release there. This is the cocking here. Just checking that sort of click back into place. I think that will do. I'll flip the camera over, and there are 4 little screw holes visible through the back plate there. So I'll get 2 screws in place. And then check that the action moves and moves freely. And then if that's the case, I can fit the other 2 screws in and tighten things up. But never just throw some screws in there and start tightening things up without checking, because every now and then something may be misaligned that you haven't picked up, and that misalignment will lead to things breaking when you go to move things. Alright, so that's just loose on the front of the camera. I'll hold that back firmly. Move my advance knob. That should cock the shutter. And does it release? It does. So the shutter cocks and releases. The action's nice and smooth. There is no problem there. So I can fit my other 2 screws in position and do the screws up. These are only brass, these screws, but obviously the manufacturer thought that would be good enough, and perhaps they're right. Right, well, I'll just find a more appropriate screwdriver and whip these 4 screws up snug. It's difficult, you won't be able to see what I'm doing probably, it's difficult doing screws up in a situation like this unless you've got very good lighting, because it's real black cat and a coal cellar stuff. You can't see what you're doing. Alright, those screws are all tight. I'm going to check the action again, make sure it's nice and smooth. That feels good. I'll put the lens back on the front of the camera. That fits nicely. In the back of the camera, you can probably see down there, there's little bits of paint are missing off the back of that shutter assembly. And that's where it's matte black paint, and basically it's just fallen off. Paint doesn't stick particularly well to aluminium, and inevitably in any handling, stuff like that tends to happen. So I've got some good matte black paint, very, very matte, and I'll just get a little bit of that on the tip of a brush, and I'll do that edge, and the 4 screw heads, I'll do them too, because I can see the brass through in at least 2 of those cases, and that will tidy that little bit up. We don't want any reflections going on inside there if we can avoid it. Okay, here's some super black 3 this is called. It's acrylic paint. It's black, it's matte, it's very, very black. And I'll just do those edges. Some of that paint loss was quite evident before I took the camera apart. The camera has been serviced before. It's spent probably most of its life in New Zealand, this camera, because this model was only marketed in Australia and New Zealand, and I believe there may have been a grand total of 200 made. And last time I looked, perhaps 35 have been accounted for, including this one. So that part's done. Here's the camera back. This slides on, and the lock here at the base. And that is my very rare Diax Standard camera, all serviced and ready for another 60 or 70 years. Thanks for watching.